Hi, I'm Mark Zipp, Crocker Farm Auction, and welcome to our third and final sale of 2020, which starts today, November 20th, and ends on December 4th. It's a 2-week-long auction with a special callback period on Saturday, December 5th. We've got a lot of exciting things in this sale, and first of all, we really want to thank all of you for your support of our auction during this crazy year. It's been an incredible year pottery-wise, and we just want to really thank you for all of your support and for making this a record-breaking year for us. Starting off, in this case, we have some exciting Ohio pottery, or Ohio River Valley pottery. We have this really fantastic folk art decorated pitcher with this bold iron slip and cobalt Federal Eagle decoration. Interesting flourish, almost looks like John Hancock's signature right there. And then 1820 on the back. So this is an exceptionally early piece for that region. Use of 2-color slip, the form, it being a pitcher, and of course featuring that American theme, makes it a very, very outstanding as well as historically important example of Ohio River Valley stoneware. This right here is one of the rarest pieces of Ohio redware that we've ever handled. This was made by William Birchnell in London, Ohio. He was a Morgantown, West Virginia trained potter, and you can see that Morgantown influence on this jar. The fact that it has these foliate devices going around, this vining and these leaves here, really links it to the Morgantown school. Pieces made early on by John Thompson, who he trained under. And it's just exceptionally not only rare, but extremely attractive in that use of copper slip decoration. This flask was made to commemorate the election of 1868. And we can see here, it actually says H.C. Moore. So we have this phonetic spelling of the name Seymour. Will meet my friends up Salt River, November 4th, 1868. And the Salt River runs through Kentucky and basically indicates that somebody is going to be defeated politically. It became a popular slogan during the early decades of the 1800s and refers to the idea that you'd be taking an alternate route, in this case, the Salt River, as opposed to the typical, much larger, much safer Ohio River. So it's basically the route that leads you to oblivion, so to speak. Right here on this side, we can see the name Grant for Ulysses S. Grant, the Republican candidate that beat Horatio Seymour in that presidential election of 1868. And it declares that he won by 45,000 votes in Ohio. And November 3rd, 1868, November 4th, 1868, both these dates are right around or on election day. And then this on the side, very cool, Grant and Colfax. Colfax was his vice presidential running mate. A very important election. It was the first election after Reconstruction. African Americans could vote, and it was largely the African American vote that helped solidify Grant's victory. Of course, he was a famous general, the leading general of the Union Army during the Civil War, so he's a fantastic, highly important American political figure. So to have a piece of American stoneware linked to him is very, very cool. From New England, we have these wonderful slip decorated pieces that are well connected. This jug and this jar, you can see the relationship and the design work on these. This piece, this jug, was made at the Captain John Norton pottery. And there is strong documentation of a nearly identical jug dating back to the early 20th century in documentation, but the family history links it all the way back to the very early 1800s. And Omindia Jerry was a girl who had a very similar jug made for her, almost identical in decoration, glaze, form, everything. And the documentation indicates that it was made by a potter at Captain John Norton's pottery, and that piece, as I said, has documentation all the way back in Spargo's book from 1926. So you can see this jar, well, we can't say for sure, has very similar foliate decoration around it and could very well be made at the same pottery or some kind of connected pottery. Two very rare, exciting pieces of early New England pottery. Moving along, this might be one of the finest glazed pieces of New England redware that we've ever handled. You see the wonderful glaze on this, almost looks abstract, modern arty, the way that we have this brown ground and then just this kind of haphazardly splashed copper decoration flowing over the top. Like I said, very modern, almost reminiscent of Georgia ore in a certain way. Very, very cool. The use of these two glazes together like this in this mixed way is just very unusual in American redware in general. Normally they're kind of typified by having strong separation, either blotched on there, slip trailed on there, something like that. And this was made in Maine, early 19th century. Forgot this little guy up here. Great mark, H&G Nash, Utica, New York, very hard to find, and exceptionally rare with this figure smoking a pipe. And you can actually see he's got his goatee here holding up the stem of the pipe. Very, very cool. This piece is probably one of the best examples of Nash stoneware known. You don't see that mark very often at all. As usual, we have some nice antipottery pigs. This example is really remarkable in that it references Thomas Nast, who was kind of a hero of the Kirkpatrick brothers who ran antipottery. The inscription here is typical: St. Louis, the future great inn, latest and only reliable railroad and river guide. But then this is where it gets interesting. Respectfully dedicated to T.H. Nast, and T.H. is an abbreviation for Thomas. And Thomas Nast was a famous illustrator from Harper's Weekly that the Kirkpatricks were greatly influenced by in their work. They did a lot of political satire and things like that on their pieces that can be directly linked to Nast's work, indicating that they viewed his political cartoons frequently in Harper's Weekly. And Nast was so popular in his day, he's actually connected to several figures. Actually would say things like the Civil War was won for the North because of Thomas Nast. I believe it was Grant said something like it was the sword of the Union Army and the pen of Thomas Nast that won us the Civil War, because his political commentary and his cartoons were that influential. So he was a very well-known figure in his day. There's a famous snake jug that descended in Thomas Nast's family that was actually given by his wife to the New York Historical Society, that features the heads of the Boss Tweed ring on the snakes. And that was a gift to Nast by the Kirkpatricks because he was one of the main figures that helped expose, so to speak, that corruption with Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed. So this piece is really exciting. We actually thought it might have been given to Thomas Nast, but it actually stayed in Illinois. It descended in an Illinois family. So, so this is a chance. I mean, it may have been one of the Kirkpatricks or another person familiar with Harper's Weekly. Somehow this piece never made it to Nast himself. You can see it says right here, Nast turning somersaults. And there's this cool drawing of a human figure kind of doing a backflip with a mule's head, a donkey's head. And that references Thomas Nast's support of a Democratic candidate in the election of 1884, Grover Cleveland. That was the first time he voted for a Democrat. He, like the Kirkpatricks, were Republicans, was Republican, and he held so much sway that it's believed that the Kirkpatricks were very upset with him for kind of switching from the Republican ticket to the Democratic ticket. But very cool piece. This pig, another great example, has a really unusual inscription, St. Louis, the Bridge City, on it. Very cool. This face jug, exceptionally rare Kentucky signed face jug. You can see how it's graffito decorated on the eyes. They actually dipped this in Albany slip and then carved around the eyes to leave the pupils. Inscription on the underside reads, E. Galloway, Paducah, Kentucky. So some research done by Brandt actually determined that Galloway had this distinctive part in his hair. There's a photograph of him taken, a period photograph, I believe dating the early 20th century, that shows him with this distinctive part. And the few other Galloway jugs known also have that part. So it's almost like a self-portrait, if you will. Very, very cool. To my knowledge, this is the only signed Kentucky face jug known. There might be other ones out there, but it's the only one that I've seen. Here's two interesting pieces related to Anna pottery. This is a fantastic Bray family temperance jug with a snake devouring this molded head of a man with a hat, turtle, lizard over here, really unusual goose design down here, which I've never seen on a temperance jug before. Interesting subject matter. And then this rustic surface. And the Brays trained in Anna, Illinois with the Kirkpatricks. They went out on their own. This piece, because of their itinerants, it's kind of hard to say, but they worked in Mount City, Illinois. They worked in Evansville, Indiana. And they also worked for a brief period in Paducah, Kentucky. So it's kind of hard to say which brother and at which site it was made at. But very, very special piece. This example, also related to Anna style, it was made in Boonville, Missouri. Has a wonderful snake handle. And this highly unusual impressed inscriptions. They actually went through the trouble of impressing this. Mr. W.E. Busen, private, assuming it's his private stock. Also from the Midwest, we have this great harvest jug, very sculptural form. Bizarre looking with these three handles, very, very, very cool. First one we've seen with this triple handle construction like this. And the mark says an inscription, Peter Jarian. And we've done a little research, and he was living in Ohio, which, you know, all traits of it also point to Ohio in terms of the style of the design, the color of the clay. Another great Ohio harvest jug with a name actually done with a stencil on it. Very, very cool. They put this stencil on the piece, somehow fixed it, glued it, whatever, dipped it in Albany slip, and it left this crisp, glazed name inscription. Dates to 1895. Has this really nice rustic handle, rustic spout construction. A couple interesting spaniels, also from out that way. From Baltimore, we have a lot of exciting pieces in this sale. We'll show you some more later. You can see this here is an incised piece of Baltimore Redware, which is really scarce as hen's teeth. And it says, "Look this way" for Henry Clay on it. Henry Clay, of course, probably the most famous Whig figure in American politics. And this piece having been found in Baltimore, and the fact that David Parr Jr., the Baltimore potter, was very well connected with the Whig Party. And the convention for the Whig ticket was held in Baltimore during the 1840s. Really suggests that David Parr made this. The other thing that kind of, it's not a smoking gun, but it really, really helps corroborate that is the style of this incising. Links it to a couple pieces that are attributed to Parr's pottery from Richmond. But the idea that you have a piece of Baltimore Redware that's this high styled and this well decorated, and it has this political cartoon, so to speak, on it. In size, it's just exceptionally rare. It certainly ranks among the best examples of Baltimore Redware known. Got a couple interesting flasks and some other nice smalls, also from Baltimore. This piece was probably made in Huntington, Long Island. Has this wonderful folk art design of a horse and the inscription Old Cherry, which probably refers to the drink that it held, probably Old Cherry brandy, something like that. The squat form, which is known in some cases from Huntington, from the F.J. Kerr pottery, as well as the Brown Brothers pottery, which is where we believe this was made, probably a Brown Brothers piece. Indicates, such pieces were used on ships, that Huntington, Long Island being a major harbor town, you could put a jug like this on a ship that was nice and squat, and it would keep it from rocking. So that kind of helps corroborate it. The main link historically to the idea that this might be a Huntington piece is this tape label on the bottom, Mrs. E. Jane Smith, 76, Brown Brothers, Long Island. And that light color, the clay, that kind of tannish color, certainly looks like that. This script, while different than the epigraph crocs that you see famously from the Brown Brothers, does look a great deal like, particularly if you look at the OLD, the penmanship on some of the Redware plates known from Huntington. So there is a strong chance that's where this is from, as a figural decorated piece from that area. Really adds importance because they just did very, very, very rarely did anything other than flowers. We have some nice Manhattan stoneware here. This Thomas Downing oyster jar is one of the marquee pieces in the auction from that region. You can see it says T. Downing's Pickled Oysters, number 5, Broad Street, New York. And this piece, based on the style of the impression, was probably made, in fact, I'll do a nice little illustration here. I'm not sure this is going to show in the video, but you can see this New Dash York and how similar the fonts are on these pieces. There's even a smaller oval mark that Crowley's used that has that slight slant to it that even looks even more like this, indicating this is probably a Crowleyist-made oyster jar. So other examples are typically attributed to T.G. Boone pottery from Brooklyn. This example, however, having this specific font, having a slightly different form, really strongly suggests that it was made of the Clarkson Crowley's pottery. So we're linking one of the most famous African-American businessmen of the 19th century with one of the foremost stoneware makers of the 19th century. So it's just very, very exciting. This is a recently discovered work, and this is the only example we've seen with this font. So that's a interesting new discovery in a very, very hot collectible area right now, oyster memorabilia. This is one of the exciting addenda lots in the auction. This came in at the last minute. You see that bold maker's mark. There's no doubt who made this. It's by Daniel Peter Schenfelder from Reading, Pennsylvania, and then decorated with this manganese and copper spotting all over the back. Probably the artist's attempt at producing a spotted hog. And it's just wonderful, not just in form, but in its decoration. Obviously, you can see the glaze is fantastic. And the maker, exceptionally rare. This is only the second example of this form that I've seen by D.P. Schenfelder. There was one that famously sold in the early 1980s at Sotheby's, in the Pauline Heilman collection. That example had an arguably less striking glaze because it didn't really utilize this slip ground. It was more splashed manganese decoration, or actually splashed copper decoration and white slip decoration splashed over an orange ground. So this example, the color on it is just very, very striking. And you can see this mark is the same stamp that D.P. Schenfelder used on his famous stoneware. On the front, there's a Martha Washington stamp. It's not postmarked or anything like that, However, it dates to 1938 or 1939. I guess it gives credence to the idea that this piece may have been shipped or intended to be shipped. At any rate, it surfaced in Pennsylvania, so if it was shipped, it did not travel far at all. We have this jar here, which is another exciting example of Baltimore stoneware. And this is a very, very important piece because it's the earliest Southern maker's mark. We're talking about pottery made south of the Mason-Dixon line. And this piece dates from 1808 to 1810, exceptionally early, decorated in the English style with complete iron dunk. So this piece, the reason why it's brownish color is because it's actually dipped in iron, which is the classic method of English decoration. But then we see this mix of the American style with this cobalt spot here and this cobalt spot accenting this large, very distinctive capacity mark. This is one of only a handful of pieces bearing this specific maker's mark known, but it predates pieces made in Pottersville, South Carolina. It predates early pottery from Tennessee made by Samuel Smith Jr. Predates any other mark that we've seen. So it really is an important example of the earliest beginnings of stoneware in the South and what it looked like, and also how it links to Northern traditions such as that made in Boston, and then also by further extent to the English tradition. Very, very cool piece. Down here we have some other Manhattan pottery, including this rare Crolius flask, Crolius bottle, nice pears jar. On the bottom we have some interesting New Jersey presentation pictures, including this exceptionally rare First National Bank of Jersey City hound-handled picture. Very cool, with a painted date 1864, the year that this bank opened. Moving along, one of the great icons of American pottery and arguably American folk art is the Remy double face harvest jug. You could find people that don't even like pottery but are obsessed with these. These are just fantastic. There's only a handful known. The last example to come to auction we sold maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And then before that may have been the late 90s. So they're exceptionally rare. This example has some restoration, and losses on these are typical. But you can see just how wonderful this piece is, not only in form, but of course in these piercing faces with the gritted teeth, reminiscent of what you'd see on other face vessels from Edgefield and elsewhere in the country. We have incised sideburns, nice cobalt brushwork. This example is actually one of the most brightly colored examples that I've seen. Some of these tended to be either dark in clay color or washed out. And this example, it's kind of interesting. Actually, this profile is a really cool view. You can see these eyes are placed lower, these eyes are placed higher, and it's almost like this face is kind of looking up to the sky, looking up to heaven in prayer or supplication, and this one is a little more serious and matter of fact. These were made by Henry Harrison Remy and Richard Clinton Remy, his son, in Philadelphia sometime during the 1850s and 60s. Really iconic and exceptionally rare. We're very excited to handle that, and that's actually a new discovery. Speaking of masterworks, this is a masterwork of North Carolina stoneware made by Chester Webster in Randolph County, North Carolina, about 1875. And you can see this incredible incising that the Webster family brought to North Carolina from Hartford, Connecticut. It's this great bird here. See just all that detail. His incising was some of the best of any potter in 19th century America, and he was very prolific at it and Very, very meticulous at it. You can see how just the detail work and the crispness of it, the confidence of his hand is very evident in this piece. These dashes through the triangles, and he used these impressed circles very often to accentuate that in sizing. The reverse even has a potted plant below the handle. The fact that this is an incised example of North Carolina stoneware makes it very important, but then you add on these other elements. You know, we have not just the bird, we have these great floral motifs, we have a potted plant, we have all this crazy embellishment and this drapery at the rim and flanking the spout. And then the idea that it's on a pitcher, and then of course with this incredible spout, the way that that's formed. This was either pulled out even further or possibly applied and then formed, making this very closely related to refined English china of the 19th century. It's a very, very special piece of Southern stoneware. It's an outstanding shield decorated jar. Very, very rare. Ohio River Valley, probably Kentucky. Very, very cool piece. Another Kentucky piece. This was made by J.H. Miller in Brandenburg. Super rare with the bird. Wonderful handle construction. Very rare form for this maker as well. The Salesman Sample grave marker by the Decker family of Chuckey Valley, Tennessee. Highly unusual. You can see this piece was never used. This is a sample for what they would have made with this bizarre birth and death date, August 3rd, 1700, and then the death date exactly 100 years later. That indicates that this piece was never used. This was made as a sample for what they would sell their customer. Exceptionally rare. This is one of the really great folk art pieces in this auction. I'm going to take this lid off to be safe. This is a Tennessee harvest jug. The applied initials, these studs all over it are just outstanding. It's a very tactile piece, very, very cool, sculptural, imaginatively decorated piece. There's even screw heads applied for the finion at the shoulder and at the handle terminals. And then to cap it all off, includes its lid, which I've never seen a harvest jug with a stoneware lid made for it. So just very, very, very cool thing. One last thing for this case I'm going to show you is one of the great examples of Bennett pottery from Baltimore known. Of course, they're known for producing Rockingham ware and art pottery later on. This is their marine pitcher, an iconic form. This piece is believed to be unique. Has a Rockingham glazed interior and then a hand-painted exterior. And you can see just how delicate this paintwork is on this, even down to the little black pupils and outlines of the eyes. We have bronze and silver paint, a sea serpent handle with red and silverish paint, and a wonderful sea green background. It's just a phenomenal work, probably a specially made piece. This is not the type of thing that the Bennetts would have produced on a regular basis just because of the painstaking time it would take to individually paint these. And of course we have the iconic Baltimore blue crab on the front. Moving along, we have some exciting pieces of Lanier Metters pottery from the 20th century. We very rarely delve into the 20th century, but when we do, it's got to be something special. And of course, Lanier Metters pottery is special, including this conjoined twin jug with a piece of kiln furniture that's connecting them that fell during the firing. We have a nice squirrel bottle. And very rare Gordy devil bottle. This Gordy piece and these Metters are examples of that unbroken connection between 19th century potters and 20th century potters. This, of course, is a brown pottery Arden, North Carolina jug with a very unusual, highly ovoid form. with some rutile even coming off the shoulder and onto the nose. Very nice example of that. Moving along, we have one of the best selections of John Bell pottery that we've had in a long time. They include this really nice celadon glazed pitcher. Very pronounced spout. Very cool. Looks like that was actually added on there when the potter formed it. And it has the mark S&S on the bottom for itinerant potters Stauffer and Schenk. Miniature pitcher and bowl set, signed John Bell. A really wonderful ewer. You do not see this form by John Bell very often. I believe we've only sold one other example. Classical handle, narrow opening, and then the maker's mark below the handle, which is unusual, John Bell, Waynesboro, as well as John Bell, Waynesboro on the underside. And this is a real masterwork of glaze and form. This is a very modern looking piece of backcountry pottery made by John Bell. Has this incredible copper glaze on it over a black ground, just striking. And there's his mark on the bottom. And to think that this piece was made somewhere between 1840 and 1880 is really remarkable. Because looking at it there, it looks like it very well could have been made well into the 20th century. It just shows how ahead of his time he was. We have some more Pennsylvania redware here, very nice examples, including this goat. This is one of the great redware figurals from the state of Pennsylvania that we've ever offered. It has some restoration on it, but it's exceptionally rare. You can see just how large it is in comparison to this dog. And the form, of course, you know, we think of a goat, we think of a playful barnyard animal. It's just a really expressive, very cool form with the horns and the goatee. This form was not done very much at all in redware. You know, Anthony Bacher from Winchester, Virginia, famously produced one that sold in the Dyerly sale back in the 90s for a lot of money. Well, it was somewhere around $70,000 or more. This example was made in Pennsylvania, but has a similar stance to that. Nice seated form, exceptionally rare. This is the first redware goat that we've actually ever offered. Moving along, we have some nice Pennsylvania pottery, including this rare Harrisburg Spaniel, initialed by the potter, made with F.H. Cowden pottery. The idea that it's a salt glazed and cobalt decorated example makes it very special. There's a few other examples from this potter known, but they're Albany slip decorated. Here's one of the best marks from central Pennsylvania that people really seek out. This is Wilson's and Young, a very short-lived partnership from Harrisburg, featuring the city's classic spitting tool design. Also from Harrisburg, there's a great piece of John Young pottery bearing Harrisburg PA mark and featuring slip-trailed and brushed bird in flower decoration. Great size, wonderful decoration. I have a nice selection of Western Pennsylvania canning jars, including this crosshatched example, including a tin lid. This cross-hatching is highly unusual for that region, really folky design on that. Harris canner and Atchison, they call the snake motif on the canning jar, very cool. Some other nice canners and other jars, including this. This is a mark you don't see very often, G&A Black from Summerfield, Pennsylvania, exceptionally rare mark with the classic black family, what they refer to as the hoof design. Moving along, more canners, including some unusual Maysville, Kentucky examples for merchants. And a nice Isaac Hewitt canning jar here. You don't see these too often. Some additional Western PA pottery down here. A couple interesting flasks, and this is a really great piece of art pottery. commemorating Yale forever. Dates to the very late 1800s, early 1900s, with this Gibson girl type decoration on it. Whoever did this was not just a decent potter, but obviously a very, very skilled painter as well and drawer. Moving along, we have a great selection of Shenandoah pottery, including this rare wax sealer canning jar by Bacher and Kern. Short-lived partnership between Anthony Bacher and Adam Kern, and we'll show you another piece by Kern later on. And our Valley offerings this time is headlined by this really wonderful sugar bowl by Anthony Bacher. This is one of the most distinctive and iconic forms produced in Shenandoah Valley pottery, the Bacher sugar bowl. It's emulated by his protege, James C. Mackley, in Mechanicstown, which is now Thurmont, Maryland. You can see this lid with applied bird holding a leaf in its beak. And that addition is very rare for these. You don't see that. You don't see that very often at all. Typically, there's some kind of object, like a floral motif applied in front of the bird sitting here that he appears to be feeding at. So to have something in the bird's mouth is unusual. You can see he's got incised legs, incised wings, incised tail. Has that classic Bacher cream and brown glaze. Here's the bowl, beautiful glaze. And then here's his maker's mark. Let's see right here. Wonderful piece. This is the best example of Bacher pottery we've handled in a long time. Some other Shenandoah pottery from Strasbourg, produced by the Bells and Everleys. Some of these are signed, including these cream jars by S. Bell and Son, the final genesis of the Bell pottery in Strasbourg, produced by Samuel Bell and his sons. This flower pot is noteworthy because it was produced in Thurmont at the William Addison Lynn pottery, and it's unclear whether Lynn was a potter or not. He probably wasn't. He probably was just a pottery owner, but that Thurmont pottery was called the Big Hunting Creek pottery, and you don't see too many pieces signed by Lynn. It's a rare mark, but to find an example in this condition, and when you do find his flower pots, they are almost always heavily damaged. To find one in this basically unused condition is very unusual. Some other nice flower pots, including this example by Solomon Bell, and this example by J. Eberly, Strasbourg. And this really unusual high-fired red clay pitcher with applied bird and floral decoration related to the work of the Everleys, but possibly Hickerson or another pottery from Strasbourg. This actually descended to a member of the Keister family in Strasbourg. Very, very, very rare piece. Moving along, we have some Westerwald pottery and some Westerwald inspired pottery by the Wingaters from New Jersey, some other canning jars and some other nice redware. And then following over here, I'm actually going to set this lid down right here so I can show the bottom of this jar. This is a great jar. This is closely related to the Solomon Bell presentation jar made for Tilly Bell at John Bell's Pottery that we sold in our last auction. In fact, it was probably made on the same day, and it may have been thrown by Solomon Bell. The cool thing is we know exactly who decorated it and who it was given to. So we have John Bell's maker's mark here, made at his pottery, of course, and that decoration bears that out. But on the bottom, it says VCB for Victor Conrad Bell. That was one of John Bell's sons. Victor Conrad, according to Rice and Stout, the famous early Shenandoah pottery book from the late 1920s, severed an artery in his wrist as a child, and so he was left to be primarily a decorator at the pottery. So the fact that we have his brushed initials on the bottom And this brushed decoration indicates he made it. And then the inclusion of the A indicates who it was made for, and that was his wife, Annie. The date 1874 is the same year that a handful of other jars were made, 2 of which are signed by Solomon Bell on the bottom, one of those 2 is signed by Solomon Bell and Alexander Conrad Bell. Victor Conrad Bell. Made on New Year's Day in 1874. So this was probably another piece made on New Year's Day in 1874. And because Victor Conrad was not a good turner, and because there are these other related works by Solomon Bell, this was very possibly thrown by Solomon and then decorated by Victor Conrad. Classic bell decoration all around, including this addition of a nice spotted tulip under the handle. Very cool, and it includes its original lid. This is a very exciting and noteworthy offering in Bell family pottery that really has great family history involved in it. This is one of the other addenda lots in this auction. For those interested in it, is 226A. This is made at the pottery of Michael and Theophilus Miller in Newport, Pennsylvania, and it exhibits their Calvin-inspired bird and wreath motif. Just wonderful decoration. Birds by this pottery are exceptionally rare. You don't see too many of them at all. And the fact that this example is included within a wreath, is very large and boldly brushed, and includes this unusual striping above, really makes this a special new discovery in central Pennsylvania stoneware. And we're excited to include this in our upcoming sale. There's a great Edmunds deer. You can see this is loosely based on the Norton Potteries reclining deer and fence motifs, but you can see it's much more naively done. In some ways, collectors like that even more when you see this highly stylized rendering of an animal. Very cool with all these dashes and stripes going through its body. Here's a Calvin piece closely related to the M&T Miller piece that I just showed you. It's actually a bird in a wreath. And you can see how those designs migrated from area to area. In this case, not too far away in central PA to Newport, Pennsylvania. But really unusual Cape Croc form, very cool. Here's a fabulous John Berger cornucopia piece. Berger was the master of slip shale decoration in American stoneware. If you were to pick one decorator who was the best, it was John Berger. This shows a cornucopia, which is brimming with flowers. His flowers are always very lifelike. There's always some three-dimensionality conveyed in some of his better floral motifs, with this flower kind of sticking out that way, and this one facing the viewer. His designs were very complex and very, very skillfully done. This came out of a recently surfaced collection out of Brooklyn, New York. It was an exciting piece of Albany stoneware. M. Tyler, one of the most well-known makers from Albany. Of course, we connect his name with the wonderful sturgeon or swordfish designs that came out of that region that have these long-toothed or long-billed fish with teeth represented. This example has a nice floral motif that really strongly links this piece to the work of George Lent. But the idea that it's a cooler of an extraordinary size with really nice incising makes that piece special. This is the best example of Cushman stoneware we've ever offered, by far. It's just a wonderful example. Typically Cushman's work was sparsely decorated, if at all. The fact that this has the historic town of Cooperstown emblazoned in large cobalt script across the front is really remarkable. Really, really great piece. And you can see that this was a more specially made piece also in the handles. They did this nice scalloping up here on the handles and blue on tops of the handles and along the edges of the handles. And interestingly, you see how the mark, of course, it always has that colon in the middle, Paul Cushman's. We have Cooper's colon town on this piece. Very cool. Very, very, very special piece, made about 1810, so fairly early. Made in the town, which of course is the home of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. I showed you that political piece earlier. Let's scoot over here. The political piece earlier, of course, with the flask, the Salt River flask. Well, what are the odds we get 2 Salt River pieces for the same auction? Well, this is really remarkable. Both of them were made in Ohio, and both of them represent the election of Ulysses S. Grant. And you can see this also refers to Seymour. Of course, it's poking fun at Seymour, just as the flask I showed you a while back did. And this is him right here, represented by this figure. And to let you know it's him, and how we have Seymour written within the banner, written within the speech bubble, almost like you'd see in political cartoons of the 19th century. And then he's saying, "I am going up Salt River. Where are you going, Frank?" referring to his vice presidential running mate, Frank Blair. And he's actually wading into the water here, kind of stupidly meandering on. And he's literally going to nowhere. As I said before, Salt River was the idea that you were going to be defeated politically, and you're headed to nowhere on this small, dangerous river out there in the Midwest. This again emphasizes Grant's popularity in his home state of Ohio. He did quite well there. The flask, I believe, said he won by 45,000. It was close to that, but I believe not quite that much. But it also is a great political piece in that it speaks to what was going on with civil rights at the time, and what was going on in American history at the time. It was the first election of Reconstruction. And so Seymour was actually considered a white supremacist. And so he was really relying on a lot of white votes that were trying to turn America back to what it was before the Civil War occurred. Whereas General Grant was trying to bring the country into a new time where African Americans could vote, the Reconstruction period where things were really changing. You know, that echoes really strongly even today, obviously. But the idea that this piece is a combination of both folk art and history and political satire, it really covers probably more areas of collecting than any other piece of pottery we've ever handled. We're really excited to handle it. It's a very, very fascinating historical object with wonderful folk art appeal. The top lot in the auction, the marquee piece, the headliner, is this wonderful water cooler by Abiel Price with this incised ship. And this, you maybe somewhere along the line somebody has seen a better ship. I have not personally seen in a book or in a collection a better rendering of a sailing ship on a piece of American stoneware. You can see the detail, you can see the amount of strokes involved. It's probably a couple hundred different size strokes, perfectly filled with cobalt. The crispness of the sails, the depth of the incising, the detail work. We have this scroll work up here, rat lines, 3 pennants at the top, waves. It just really is a masterwork. And then to include a nice date at the bunghole indicating when it was made, 1839. And then the person for whom it was made, John B. Wilson, is really special. How do we know it was made by Abiel Price? Because this decoration on the back is as good as his signature. This is his signature floral motif, this tulip within a wreath-like foliate device. This added work is unusual, but if you were to look at this right here, this is clearly Price's work. He was trained in New Jersey, and he traveled to Massachusetts by 1839. I believe he's back in New Jersey potting at South Amboy for a period where this masterwork was made. You can even see there's scalloping around the handles and nice decoration on the handles. Just a really wonderful piece of not just stoneware, but maritime related art. Moving along, seeing the masterworks, we have this great Harrington and Berger Rochester churn with a pheasant on a flower. And this was made at the short-lived partnership of Thompson, Harrington, and John Berger in Rochester. So you're combining, it's kind of like an all-star team of potters, if you will. Thompson Harrington, of course, a potter who became really well known for doing star face designs in Lyons, New York, and then John Berger, of course, the master potter from Rochester, who did this particular design as well as many other great figural designs on his work in Rochester. You can see that this pheasant has this exceptional detail that you just don't really see in American stoneware. Not only is it highly detailed in terms of just the sheer number of strokes involved, but it's probably the most anatomically accurate, the most artistic, the most realistic we get with slip trailing in American pottery. And that's one of the things that makes us marvel about his work, because if you were to draw this today or paint this today, somebody would say, wow, it's a real work of art. That's amazing. You know, I'd want to frame that. The idea that he put this on a churn, so he took this piece as unfired greenware and held it in such a way as not to break it, not to knock a handle off while it was still leather hard, and then get out his slip cup, which is not like those little plungery things that us potters use today. It's this crude pottery tool with a quill in it, and with your thumb on the end that controls the flow of it, and paint this on a rounded vessel and not slip up and not mess up in such a way that he was smearing the cobalt, and then fire it perfectly. It's just really remarkable. It's just a really remarkable feat. He's a true artist in his day. The idea that this was used and not put up on a shelf as art pottery back in the day kind of boggles the mind. This is an exceptionally rare design for Berger. I've only seen a couple other pheasants. So if you're into the different species he did, this is an exceptionally rare design for him. And of course, it's seated on this incredible flower, this wonderful daisy with these dots. And again, the three-dimensionality, as I talked about earlier, is conveyed. We have these petals in the front are longer than the petals in the back, so it's kind of pushing out at you. There's a little foreshortening here, but these are all artistic things that you just don't really see in stoneware except with him. Moving along, this is a really great example of Southern stoneware that is inspired by the Manhattan stoneware tradition. So we see it has this dark clay and this 4 impressed. And this handle that comes down like this as opposed to ending into the vessel, just disappearing into the body. And so all these attributes say it looks like Manhattan, but it's not Manhattan. This was made by a Manhattan trained potter, a Manhattan influenced potter, probably in the state of Virginia, possibly in the state of Tennessee. It could be an itinerant potter named John Floyd that worked in Tennessee, or there's a chance it even might be linked to John Morgan from Rockbridge, Virginia. But at any rate, very, very cool thing. These designs have a strong link to what we think it was done by David Morgan from Manhattan, Corlear's Hook. And so we feel like this piece may have some kind of connection there. Here's some nice big pictures. A. Keister from Strasbourg, a nice Philadelphia picture. This piece, you could probably tell who made it just without seeing the stamp. Chandler Maker, Thomas Chandler from Edgefield. Classic alkaline glaze piece with his bold use of iron slip decoration. Moving along, really wonderful 12-gallon jar made by James or William Leet Hamilton in Greensboro. Classic early beaver-inspired floral designs done on their Greensboro work. Great size, 12, and of course the thing that stands out is this wonderful bowed rose motif, which possibly indicates this was a specially gifted item, maybe a presentation piece for a wedding or something like that. This is the only jar that I've seen from Greensboro that had any kind of applied work like that. Very, very cool. Looking at the top shelf, we have some interesting other pieces, including a New Jersey churn with an applied face medallion, a wonderful Manhattan vertically handled jar with really crisp incising. Very nicely decorated H. Smith & Company jar from Alexandria, Virginia, exhibiting that classic potting and more unusual floral design than you typically see from that area. This is one of the most rare pieces of redware that we've handled in a long time. You can see this picture in bowl set looks a lot like the work of Anthony Bacher, but is actually signed A. Kern for Adam Kern. And this was made in Winchester, or possibly at the Big Hunting Creek Pottery in Thurmont, where Kern worked. I mentioned earlier, if you're paying attention, that Kern worked briefly with Bacher in Winchester as a partner, but things soured pretty quickly. Only worked with him for about a year, and then he headed back up to Pennsylvania. But this shows a very Bacher-esque glaze and form. This pitcher and bowl set was made by J. Everly Company, also inspired by Bacher, probably by Lorenzo Fleet, who worked for Bacher and then ended up working for J. Everly Company in nearby Strasbourg. Classic multi-glaze, great form with this fiddlehead back, soap dish, and applied strap handles. Moving along over here, we got a couple more things over here. Really nice 16-gallon Pomeroy, Ohio advertising jar. Tough to find advertising jars of this size. We have some interesting New York State stoneware and New England stoneware, including this William Warner Eagle. Nice Cowden, the bird on the stump. One of the best half pieces we ever had, this bird within a wreath, very unusual. Classic Norton reclining deer, a more unusual in size deer by C. Hart of Sherburne, New York, and a really rare Edmonds and Company dog design that is actually connected to a decorator from White's Utica that traveled up to Charlestown, Massachusetts and did that design there. Moving on into the center room, we have a few more interesting pieces to discuss, including this great Dave jug. Obviously, we see it's missing the spout. This was rounded out. It gives you a good opportunity to see what his throwing was like from the interior. There's actually some sand residue in the upper shoulder, indicating this thing probably held sand or maybe a plant at some point. But the idea that this piece was saved really says how important these pieces were in Southern households. This had the spout broken off at some point, and then it was carefully ground down to form a jar that you could store things in just as you would do a jar. The great thing about this is the signature. This has a really, really bold, expressive, confident Dave signature. You can see here Dave and then this great flourish going underneath it. It's very, very fantastic how that signature is done, and unusual as well. The other thing that's interesting, the mark, or the date is June 27th, 1861, which is fairly late for him and exceptionally rare. I believe there's less than 10 Dave pieces from 1861 known. So this is during kind of his swan song in potting. He would only pot a few more years. But great form, newly discovered out of Florida, completely fresh to the market, exciting piece. This is a great piece for any student of Mid-Atlantic or Virginia pottery. This is signed on the bottom by Hugh Robbins Marshall, H.R. Marshall maker, Baltimore, 1822. H.R. Marshall briefly had a pottery in Baltimore, and he's also known to have worked in Rockbridge County, Virginia, and I believe he's also in Lynchburg, Virginia, and of course there's recent excavation indicating he worked in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And the idea that we have a piece of his work that's hand and size, that's intact, is really, really remarkable, very special. This is the only piece like this we've seen in size of the bottom, very closely related to what you'd see from William Morgan and Thomas Amos from Baltimore, with that size signature on the bottom. This is a Baltimore masterwork that was recently discovered. A very, very exciting piece with a ship on it. There's only 3 Baltimore ships that I know of. There were 2 up until fairly recently. This is the 3rd one. And you can see it has this boldly brushed ship with a pennant coming off the top. You have gun ports or portholes here. Nice size to the design, kind of spreading across the shoulder. And then on the reverse, we have an interesting spotted and striped flag, which my personal interpretation of it is it's a commissioning pennant, the same pennant that was on the front but done in close-up. And a commissioning pennant would indicate a ship was coming into naval service. And once that pennant was raised, that ship was to serve the duty of the U.S. government. And until it was lowered, it would always be in service to the Navy. So as a tradition, you hoist that flag, we have something ushered in as a Navy seafaring vessel. Really great water cooler signed by Parr and Berlin. There's maybe like 5 pieces known signed by Parr and Berlin. This is David Parr Sr.'s only mark in Stoneware, very influential Baltimore potter. And James Berlin was his partner. This is the only cooler known by this partnership. And you can see that Potter has placed the bunghole on the side. This is the earliest water cooler produced in the southern United States. And you can see just how unfamiliar they may have been with that form, that they put the bunghole on the side, which really adds to the folk art appeal of the piece, I think. I think it's really, really fascinating. And of course, this classic slip trail decoration, which would go on to influence southern potters as well, potters further south. This right here is a great 4-gallon pitcher. This is the only 4-gallon clover decorated pitcher that I've seen in Baltimore Stoneware. I've seen a couple other 4-gallon pitchers, even 5-gallon pitchers. There's a couple really great large size storefront pitchers known, but the only 4-gallon exhibiting Baltimore's classic clover motif. Moving along, we have a nice selection of other pieces we'll be selling in the sale from a broad spectrum of collecting areas, including this A.C.D. Spencer jug from Ohio. Nice work here by Braun. There's a Cushman with distinctive coggling. Some Buffalo advertising down here. There's some nice Manhattan pieces here, including a Corlier's hook piece made by Thomas Comerall, another piece made by John Remy III. Moving along, there's some more pieces, including this very unusual T.J. Subtle Periopolis PA piece. Very unusual to have a stencil signature. Actually, some press signatures even rare, but to have it stenciled in there is very unusual. And this piece has really great brushwork as well. Very cool N. Cooper and Power Maysville, Kentucky piece. Double stamped, one with this horizontal stamp, the other with this arched semicircular stamp. This was probably made at the Atchison Pottery in New Geneva. Some nice Western Pennsylvania stoneware, this really nice palatine piece with these bold leaves or flower blossoms all over it. Very different, very expressive, very flashy. Some nice southern pieces, including a couple Lanier Meadows vases. Moving along, we have a collection of Rockingham ware by the Bennett Pottery from Baltimore. Some more southern pottery. A lot of Western Pennsylvania pieces, and some West Virginia mixed in here. This cake crock and this 6-gallon crock were made by, I believe this is signed Harden from Palatine. Ritchie and Hamilton Palatine. Very, very cool. Moving along, we have some Redware, including this A. Wilcox unglazed jar. Really nice maroon glazed jar from New England. This is a really interesting glaze on this example. Couple Norton urn pieces. This is a rare survivor. We wish it was the whole thing. That's part of a ship crock, probably from the Fort Edward area of New York State. And we have some Red Wing pieces. Some more bird decorated crocks, some Valley crocks by Miller and Keister and W.B. Kenner. More Western PA pottery. Some other selected pottery, Western Pennsylvania, Beaver, Pennsylvania. Moving on over here is some interesting chemical stoneware made in Baltimore. Unusual spouted forms used for producing and storing chemicals and dispensing chemicals as well. Very unusual form. I've only seen a handful of pieces produced in mid-19th century America. They actually had cobalt decoration that were chemical stoneware pieces. You can find much later examples from Ohio, done in sewer tile and that sort of thing. But this is some of the earliest chemical stoneware you can find, with really interesting forms and nice brushwork as well. Classic people crock from Uniontown, Pennsylvania. A very interesting Spirits of Turpentine presentation cooler made for W.H. Crandall. And W.H. Crandall was related to one of the potters. So this is Clark and Fox. And Fox was E.S. Fox. Pottery was in Athens, New York. W.H. Crandall was a doctor, and he was E.S. Fox's, Ethan Fox's brother-in-law. And he traveled out west. And so this piece was presumably made as a gift by Ethan Fox for Crandall to store turpentine, which according to our research actually had some medicinal qualities back in the day. Nowadays, of course, you never get near the stuff. You'd use it for thinning paint and that sort of thing, and that's it. But great form, great story to it, incredible letters. I mean, look how big that lettering is on there. It's remarkable. Last but not least, we have this wonderful cooler made by the Craven brothers, J.D. and T.W. Craven. Blue decorated pottery from North Carolina is very rare. The fact that this actually has an inscription, Moore County, North Carolina, indicating where it was made is remarkable. The size of this piece is incredible. You can see it's this double-handled jug cooler, and the spigot would go here. Very sculptural piece. Again, you see this on stoneware, on better pieces of stoneware. The idea that they're touting a town or touting where it was made. In this case, they're not even talking about a specific town or city. They're saying Moore County, like we are representing this county with this pottery. And so this was something that would be displayed in a Grange Hall or in a storefront or somewhere that would proudly represent the area. Very, very cool piece. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video. That's it. If you have any interest in anything in this auction, you can talk to a member of the Zip family at 410-472-2016, or you can reach us by email at info@crockerfarm.com. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it.